Business meeting of the Gettysburg Planning Commission today, July 15th at 7:01 p.m. We have a new sound system. It sounds strange to me up here, but hopefully it sounds better to you all out there. But for Planning Commission members, we just learned from our zoning officer that if you would like to turn off your hot mic, you can press the button and turn it from green off when you're not speaking. That might make it easier because it sounds like it's picking up a lot. But what a great thing to have everyone to be able to hear us. And what a great thing that all of you are here. The first item is review and approve our agenda. And as we look at it, I'd just like to make a few notes. The first thing we'll do is to approve our minutes. Then there is public comment for anything that is listed here on the agenda. After that, we have 2 items of tabled old business that we'll take in turn. Before we focus on a part of the meeting that I imagine many of you are here for, which is to begin a discussion or continue a discussion about rezoning in the Borough of Gettysburg, we'll begin by listening to a presentation from some local residents who have asked to be on our agenda and to make comment and ask questions. And then this commission will have a chance to discuss item or part 1 and part 5. So if you're thinking what is on the agenda tonight, it is part 1 and part 5 of the draft zoning ordinance. Now we have a process here on the Planning Commission that we take public comment at the beginning, but within reason, we also encourage some back and forth along the way. So should you wish to engage when we get to that part, please raise your hand and we'll try to accommodate that, though we also want to have an efficient meeting and leave at a good time. And then we'll close with some announcements before additional comments from Planning Commission members, and then a final opportunity for public comment on anything and everything. So with that, we have a full Planning Commission today, all 5 members, as well as our alternate and our borough engineer and our zoning officer. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, so Sarah moved and John seconded. All those in favor of approving today's agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? And that motion passes 5-0. Now, how about the minutes from the June 17th, 2024 meeting? Is there a motion to approve those minutes, or are there any corrections or questions about the minutes? Okay, how about a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved.
And is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, so John moved and Sarah seconded. Any discussion about those minutes from last month? Okay, all those in favor of approving those minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? And that motion passes 5-0. Now, here is an opportunity for public comment to items on our agenda, which again include tabled old business A, B, as well as the zoning process related to part 1 and part 5. And if you could, because we do have a recording, I should say, thank you to residents who contributed to record today's meeting as they have the last 2 meetings. Thank you very much. But because of that, if you could stand at that podium and make your comments from there. Okay. Then let's move to tabled old business A. This is the library subdivision at the Lutheran Seminary and John. You could, I think you could sit here.
Yeah, you can sit there, yeah.
I think John's going to review some areas where we are, and then we'll.
Since the last meeting, the borough engineer provided revised comments based on a submittal that we had received. The comments 1, 2, and 3. 1 is an easement needs to be provided for sanitary sewer lateral extending from building 448 on lot 1 into the tract 4 remainder as it appears to cross a property boundary line. The easement needs to extend from L8, the proposed eastern subdivision line, to connect into the main sanitary sewer into Springs Avenue. Also, force main FM sanitary line needs to be added to the legend. 2, the plan cover sheet needs to include a reviewed by engineer block, and number 3 is a non-dedicated streets agreement needs to be enacted for Springs Avenue and Springs Hotel Road. The agreement should include maintenance responsibility of improvements between the owner of Lot 1 and the owner of the Tract 4 remainder. Other than that, the as was discussed at the last meeting, at that time, the comments were, there were more of them, and it made more sense to table at this time. I mean, the borough engineer can provide additional comment, but all three of these items can be achieved with a conditional approval of the subdivision.
I agree with the assessment there. I think a conditional approval is what I would recommend tonight. We do have Ryan with us from K&W. He's been here a couple of meetings now to present this plan. I think the only thing I wanted to add to John's remarks there is just a kind of a reminder that this is just a subdivision. The plan is titled library, so we know that that's what it's for, but this is really, you have to put the blinders on. It's just a subdivision that we're approving at this point. There's no proposed feature, there's no land development or anything like that. They'll have to resubmit the land development process, and we'll go through the whole thing again whenever it gets to that time. But again, this is just to create the property lines that are being proposed. And then one last thing quickly, this is just for Ryan's sake. We got tripped up on the planning module. As you can see, that has been removed from my letter.
Yeah, I noticed that.
And just so the board understands what that is you have to have sewage planning. Anytime somebody wants to subdivide a lot, we don't want to create a lot unless we know that you can actually build something on it. So if there's no sewage availability on that lot, then we wouldn't allow it to happen. So we always require that, we being townships. This is a requirement because Cumberland Township also, or part of this subdivision is Cumberland Township. So there's a planning module component to this. Whenever it got to the borough side of things, said, yeah, we also need to have that planning module, I guess. It has to be signed by the sewage enforcement officer, which really doesn't exist in Gettysburg. All of the properties in Gettysburg, 100% of them are on public sewer, Gettysburg Municipal Authority. So we don't have a sewage enforcement officer that would govern on-lot systems, set sand mounds and those kind of things. So we got tripped up on it. I'll do whatever we need to do to get you over the goal line with Cumberland Township. So I just simply removed it from my letter from now so that it is not a condition of approval. But I did want to mention that because that had been something that we had talked about in previous meetings. So aside from that, it's a pretty clean plan. There's not a whole lot with it. There is a couple of easements there. I would suggest that that agreement, I wanted to hear from Ryan, maybe he can give you guys an update on where you stand for the non-dedicated streets agreement, because that is an important part of this. If you would conditionally approve this, ultimately you wouldn't sign the plan until you know you have that agreement in place. So that's probably the most important thing of the three comments, is number 3 about the access agreements.
Yeah, right now we have that in the process of being worked on through our office. So it hasn't been sent out yet for any signatures. But that is, I'm hoping by the end of this week we can really keep that item moving. I'll have to take a look a little bit more through that agreement itself. I don't want to speak too much, but we're going to try and have that finalized before we make it the final signatures and all that kind of stuff.
Perfect.
Yeah, other than that, the other 2 items we already have addressed. So I'm really just here if you guys have any questions. I know we've been here a few times in the past already.
Okay, so it sounds to me like there is an opportunity here to have a motion with conditional approval based on these 3 items. Is that correct, Chad?
You got it.
Just these 3?
Just those 3. Unless there's anything else, John, that you know of from you or the county or GMA or anything like that?
No, as it came to the subdivision items, they've already been addressed from the zoning perspective.
So given that we've talked about this at several meetings, let's have one last round of conversation here. Subdivision only. Any questions for the library about this subdivision plan before a motion?
I just have a question about the convention of titles for plans. I know you have an owner's statement, which I assume will be signed by someone at the seminary.
Right.
So I was just curious about why the title would be for the Adams County Library System when it's actually for the seminary.
You can title a plan whatever you want to title it.
Okay.
So that has no bearing on this plan whatsoever.
Okay.
It's that owner signature block that you mentioned.
Right.
That's going to have a notarized signature on it, and that'll have to be somebody from the seminary. So essentially, this is the seminary's plan. It's a subdivision of the seminary. It
Right.
really has nothing to do with the library at this point.
So say they subdivide the lot and decide not to sell to the library after all, they still have the lot. They could do, even though it's titled for the library, they could sell it for any other purpose. It doesn't matter what the plan is titled.
Yeah,
or whatever
this
it's done.
plan creates a lot that is allowed to be sold.
Right.
It doesn't actually create the lot. That's a common thing that's
Right.
that's misconceived, is the lot doesn't exist until it's conveyed, until it's
Right. The
sold
new
from
deed
one
is
person
created,
to
right.
another. So this plan can get recorded at the courthouse, and there is a lot now that could get sold at any time to the library or anybody else.
Right.
But that lot doesn't actually exist until there's that conveyance.
The plan being titled about the library and showing a future potential library there doesn't mean that the subdivided lot wouldn't be,
Yeah, and well, the plan doesn't show a potential future library.
okay. Right.
It just has the
shows-
title.
Right.
Just has the title. That's the only.
It does sort of, I mean, it doesn't really show that. It's
Right,
not a development
right.
plan, but it shows something.
Yeah.
John.
Shows something.
Generally, a developer will utilize the title for marketing purposes.
Okay.
It's like, horse run estates or something, like just generally, it's not really germane to what's the action of creating the lot for sale.
All right, thanks.
Are there any other questions or comments about this item? Would anyone wish to make a motion to move for conditional approval?
I would move for conditional approval with the conditions being, from the letter from Chad dated
July 10th.
July 10th, 2024.
Mhm. Nick moves. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, so Nick moves and Marty seconds. Is there any discussion? And this is SLD-230003, titled Library Subdivision at Lutheran Seminary. Any further discussion on this? Okay, then all those in favor of moving this for conditional approval, please say aye.
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 Aye. Opposed? Okay, that motion passes 5-0. Thank you very much. Our next item is SLD 240002, Spectra Kote 301 East Water Street. Thank you and welcome. And John, do you want to begin over on this?
Yes, one moment. Wait this computer to catch up with me. Okay. So as was previously discussed at last month's meeting, this plan, it's a land development plan related to an industrial property already in existence. The proposal is an addition to the southwestern side of the structure. The actual improvements themselves, I'm trying to pull it up. As you can see there in this, there's this very small text. It's a stone area. Oh, where to put this? So this general area, we have stone. There's a bump out here. I believe they're using it for loading bay right now. They can provide more information specifically, but the proposal then is to modify some of that stone area, put a building addition of 1,116 square feet, roughly 50 by 23, and then a concrete truck unloading area. This will increase the impervious surface matter on the property, but in reviewing the changes, it will most likely be a minor, less than 800 square feet of impervious surface matter. We just received that information today. We'll be reviewing it administratively this week. But overall, that's what the plan is as provided. There are some additional improvements identified related to you have the bicycle trail easement that's shown, and some other just light lot accents on the plan. But other than that, that's what's occurring. The applicants here, they can provide direct information regarding the project, and Chad can then provide the engineering comments. From the zoning, the Adams County Office of Planning and Development provided their comments, which they don't have any problems with this. From a zoning perspective, they're going to meet all of the industrial district requirements, but there are concerns then with the Saldo and stormwater management sections of our ordinances, which the borough engineer gets into with his comments.
Great, thank you, John. And before we turn it to Chad, could you tell us where in the process we are, when we received it, just as a reminder, and where the clock is regarding our approval?
So we have 1 month on this one. We received it in May due to a timing issue and then the county's review that really delayed us last month from initiating the general review. But yeah, so we would anticipate if the item is tabled tonight, there would be an action in August to either seeking an extension or we would go
Okay.
through the motions as necessary.
Okay. And Chad, it looks like you have 15 comments. Do you want them to begin, or would you like to start?
Maybe I'll just mention the comment that I think that we need to focus attention on tonight is with regards to which of the streetscape enhancement improvements are going to be required by the Planning Commission at this stage. And I'm going to cut right down to comment number 15, John, if you can go all the way to the end. I mentioned here that this property is currently not in the streetscape overlay district. So there are certain requirements that would not necessarily be required by the applicant at this time. It is in the proposed streetscape enhancement district, which is where we made a list of streets. We're going to be talking about the zoning ordinance soon. So if they would be to apply for this come next year, this would be a shall, not a should. But that is something I think that we should still have the discussion. Currently, it's a should put decorative streetlights along the street there. We're talking about Water Street, very similar to what Shippensburg Physical Therapy is currently doing with their development. So the other thing is the HABI, the Healthy Adams Bicycle Pedestrian Inc., did a master plan and secured some easements along the frontage of this property to build a trail across this property at some point in time. So while our ordinance says you shall build sidewalks along all of the streets, this current property, the street frontage is really small compared to the rest of the property. So you can require a little bit of sidewalk to be built, a couple feet of it, or we can have an arrangement so that the actual trail could get built someday in the future. So those are the two things that I wanted to touch on. A lot of these other comments are administrative in nature. It's a really small addition to a rather large building. So there isn't, it's over top of existing impervious area as John presented earlier. I don't see this being much of an impact to the community at all. So I don't feel a need to stop on any of those other comments. It's really about the trail, the sidewalk, and whether or not there should be a requirement for decorative streetlights. So maybe I'll kick it over to the applicant from there.
Okay, so then now let me formally say thank you for being here. And could you maybe introduce yourself to us and then answer that and whatever else you want to share in the way you wish?
Absolutely. Good evening. My name is Joshua George. I'm with Landworks Civil Design. I'm based in York. And this is Zach Eckert with Spectra Kote Companies, the president of Spectra Kote. So we're here to seek your conditional recommendation for approval based upon Chad's comments. We recognize that there's a couple items we should discuss with you tonight, and in fact, what Chad mentioned was probably the first on our list to discuss as well. But our end game and our goal was to hopefully get your recommendation for approval based upon Chad's comments before we leave tonight. So with that in mind, as you've heard from John and from Chad, we have a very small building addition proposed here. The purpose of the building addition is to provide indoor storage for a couple of large tanks that actually already exist on the property, and Zach can talk a little bit more about what they do at Spectra Kote and what these tanks are for. But essentially, there's going to be no new employees added because of this. There's not going to be any additional sewage needs. There's no additional water needs. We are building a small addition for the sake of storing some tanks. In order to then access those tanks, we provide a truck parking and dock area that is connected or adjacent to the proposed building addition. So we're adding a little bit of impervious area, about 312 square feet, because of that building or that truck dock addition. So very, very simple project. We were hoping to be here last month, but unfortunately, county did not get their comments to you and to us in time. So that delayed us back to this month. So we've already lost a month waiting for that to happen. And then ironically, we get their letter and it says, we're good. Not a single comment on the letter. So, we would like to just talk about the couple of comments related to streetscaping and streetlights. And Zach, maybe you can just tell them a little bit about what you do at Spectra and what the project's about.
Yeah, so Spectra Kote, we manufacture water-based coatings for paper-based packaging. It's used in industrial food packaging. And so the new warehouse facility is to store raw materials for that process and to ease the incoming, outgoing of those materials for our production. And it's necessitated out of some increase in business that we're projecting, and it'll improve just general throughput of everything that we do. That's kind of the long and short of what we do. And based on all the comments, I mean, we'd be more than willing to, work with the streetscape planning. I was very much involved with the bike path integration, and we provided land for it as well. So, whatever the board would recommend, we would be on board, with that design process.
Do you want to say anything specific to what Chad just laid out, or?
Recognizing that what Chad is saying is, we don't have to do it, but we'd like you to do it. And what you just heard from Zach is that we're willing to work with the borough to make that happen. So to the extent that, the street lighting would be continued from the Shippensburg Physical Therapy Project down essentially to the creek along Water Street, we're on board with doing that. We had talked about this with Chad early on in the project when we sat down to discuss it initially. So, we understand that. There's also a couple comments in here about adding a few trees on the property. We're certainly on board with adding a few trees as well. The physical location of those trees will be more of a final determination based upon the timing of the bike path, if that actually happens or not, or if it happens anytime in the near term. Or we can, agree that they should be put somewhere else on the property in the meantime. So we're very much on board with making this happen and working with everybody to hopefully get what you want and also to hopefully get what we want.
Before we discuss, John, thank you. John, any reactions to that?
No, it's within your prerogative
Okay.
to accept and review proffers from a developer.
So to my fellow planning commission members, it might be that we are moving towards some sort of approval this evening, if that is what people are comfortable with, or not. So we need to have a discussion here, and at the end, any type of motion. So before we get to a motion, what kind of questions might you want to ask the applicants here?
Charles, if I may chime in, John, could you go back to sheet 3 and scroll up to the top where the property frontage is? So zoom in there. So that's Water Street, and if you go to the left there a little bit, John, there's a property line that goes right down the middle of their access drive there. So really the parcel that's in question right now is everything to the left of that property line that's down their access drive. So you do have the rights to require a piece of sidewalk from that line left. Right there's the creek, so you wouldn't go past the creek essentially with that. That's at the end of their property line as well. So you could require a sidewalk now, but John was showing there, if you could show that again, what you just did there, John. The rest of this easement to the left, that piece right there, there is an easement, and there's a label right there that says trail easement. That is what Zach said, that he had worked with Habby on providing the property for a future trail there to get connected. So again, what you have the rights to do now is require a piece of sidewalk just along that piece of Water Street. A piece of sidewalk wouldn't fit with the rest of the trail system, so it would be kind of out of order, So I think what Zach's saying is he's on board with trying to help promote the trail system at some point. Josh also mentioned something that we had in the past made notes on a plan that says within so many months or years, of the trail connection that this property owner will build their piece of it. We just did something like that with the Getty's Golf. So the reason why I say that is because the parcel just to the east of that property line that I'm talking about is currently a vacant lot. The Shippensburg Physical Therapy is the next property over, is that one that John's circling right now. So there will be a piece of property right in between there that won't have the decorative streetlights or the trail system. So if you wanted Spectra Kote to build theirs now, there's still going to be a little bit of a break. Maybe it makes better sense to have notes on a plan that they're required to do it at some point and have a developer's agreement to that effect.
So with notes on a plan, is that conditional approval with notes on a plan? Is that how it would be
If you wanted to
phrased?
do it that way, or you require it to be built now, yeah.
And just so everyone up here, so this is number 15, that is street lights. And where is sidewalk? Which number of your comment is sidewalk?
So I jumped you down to 15 just because I wanted to make sure that I was clear about the should and not the shall with the streetscape and the lights associated with it.
Mhm.
The sidewalk is an ordinance requirement. Yes,
Yeah,
number five, thank
okay.
you.
So for everyone's interest, we're looking at number 5 and 15.
But again, the sidewalk
Yeah.
requirement is along a street frontage,
Right.
not technically where the easement is. So there's kind of, it's a quirky discussion.
And the sidewalk that was built along the physical therapy building is more than a sidewalk. That is sort of supposed to be the inner loop, multi-use trail.
Exactly. It was
Probably-
designed to be 8 feet wide so that it could accommodate bike traffic.
Okay, so what they would maybe build is something more like that, that would.
Exactly.
And who owns the parcel in between?
Still the Blue Mountain Group, I believe it's
Oh,
called,
that's
is the Shippensburg Physical
Oh, that's
Therapy.
right,
It's the
okay.
Gettysburg Physical Therapy now, but I think
Right.
they're called the Blue Mountain Group.
I would like to just thank you for working with Happy and getting the path in there. I think we owe you a great deal of gratitude there for wanting to work with the community. I can't believe you had to submit a full land development plan for this
We couldn't either.
rather small. So I don't know if our requirements, I think it would be a bit harsh to have too many requirements for this plan, honestly. That's just my personal opinion. Shippensburg Physical Therapy did a macadam, I believe, 8 foot wide.
Correct.
And I would imagine that would work as a continuation. Again, that's just my opinion there, but and I'm not too sold on the streetlights, but that's just my opinion.
The way the right-of-way worked with the borough is, I mean, I'm curious how it worked compared to how our sidewalks work. So if they're willing to construct this, does the right-of-way or the easement say that the borough maintains it, or is it just, what does the easement to the borough actually do?
I don't know if I know the answer to that question. It's a good question.
Down,
Yeah, I sent it all to Josh. Whenever he had originally approached us about this, I sent this, I said, just so you know, there's this little easement here, and I sent it over to him. So it was an easement from the property owner to the borough. It wasn't to Habby. The borough is the owner of the easement, but I'm not sure what it says about ownership and maintenance of the trail system. Typically, if there is decorative streetlights that we would want to have, then that would be dedicated to the borough. For instance, the Blue Mountain Group that we're talking about, there's an easement there that those lights are all dedicated to the borough. So Robbie will be maintaining those once those are functional.
You know, according to the plan that you attached here, it looks like some places it's proposed to be 9 feet, some 10 feet. There's all different, and then there's, rain gardens, permeable pavement, planters, different things. Is the goal that entire thing as shown on that plan would be created at this time?
I don't think so.
Okay.
What Zach did a few years ago was he dedicated the land
Right.
to be used for that purpose at whatever point in time Happy gets funding
To
make
build
the
it,
trail
okay.
actually happen. So the land is there, it's ready to be
Mhm.
used, just like you're going to build a street or a sidewalk or anything else. What the ordinance requires now, as part of the land development, would be sidewalk along the frontage.
Right.
So what we would be essentially talking about is it could be required that we would build that piece from the access drive over to the creek, and it would just stop at that point for that now until the trail was either extended or the adjoining property was connected between the physical therapy
Okay.
and Zach's property. So there are a couple of pieces that
Mhm.
need to be done to make it all fit together like a puzzle.
And at the bridge, there's no sidewalk there?
Correct.
Yeah, there's nothing.
And I think it's also important to note, so I always go back to the middle school. The trail system that goes along the middle school is an asphalt trail, and it was made to be wider so you can accommodate bicycles. And that's kind of the same concept here. The trade-off is instead of a 4 or 5 foot wide concrete sidewalk, you go to asphalt, which is a little less expensive but much wider. So it ends up being a similar expense to the property owner.
Okay, others want to comment? I am hearing Marty propose a concept where we approve this, perhaps not with conditions related to streetlights and sidewalks. Is that kind of the direction you were?
I mean, I think the sidewalk makes sense, unless we want to tie it in with Blue Mountain Group's development, like we did with over off of Steinware.
Okay.
You know, you want that connectivity for sure, but where the sidewalk ends, I don't, you know.
All right, so building on that, what do others think, if we're using Marty's as a starting spot here?
My other question was that your letter, John, your staff recommendation was that we table this plan to address the outstanding issues that Chad brought up, and there were more than the ones that we've been talking about. Chad, do you have an opinion about whether or not the plan should be tabled, or that the conditions could be met fairly easily with conditional approval?
Yeah, an opinion. It's so I echo some of the comments that were made earlier. I think you heard Marty and Josh both say it's such a small addition over stoned area that it was hard for us to even make the decision that this is a land development plan. So I hate to trip it up just because of exactly what it is. I say that tongue in cheek though, because I'm not, in the past you have heard me say with 15 comments, you should table it until it's all cleaned up. So a conditional approval with 15 conditions is kind of usually more than what we do. So I don't know if I have a major objection to pushing it across the goal line here, but it's based on the fact that the land development component of this is such a small component.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Sorry.
No.
Roundabout answer.
Yes.
If you look at the comments, the big ones are the ones we just talked about.
Yeah, the only other one I guess wondered about was the stormwater management. You said you might need a waiver or something?
Yeah, so they did submit, it's going to be under 800 square feet of new impervious area, so they submitted, it goes to Deb English. We administratively handle it.
Okay.
It's going to be super simple.
Okay, so nothing other major that you perceive to meet the requirements?
Correct, yeah, there's no need for new stormwater management in this case.
Okay.
Because of the small amount of impervious area that's proposed.
Okay.
Right.
So the staff recommendation is if we do choose to move, that we include the items identified by the zoning officer, borough engineer, and Adams County. And we should list those in any motion that we make here. And so it sounds like one of them is number 5 sidewalk. Is there anything else?
Do we need to officially waive them by line, like we've done in the past, where we're deviating from?
I don't think we've ever had to do every one by one. We're not waiving them. We're saying all the conditions here, but like particularly highlighting the big ones.
But I think particularly for the sidewalk, the borough ordinance right now says that they should be building a sidewalk between where the property is and where the driveway is, which I'm in agreement with other folks who have talked about it. I think that's a bit much right now when there's nothing connecting it. So do we have to separately say that we're waiving that?
Let me ask this question. What do you think about the note that someday in the future they get built if the other Blue Mountain Group property gets built? Like we did if you like that idea, then essentially addressing the comment would be adding the note. So it could still be a condition of approval. They satisfy it with the adding the note.
I guess what I'm wondering is what you just talked about, though, a minute ago with the difference between sidewalk and asphalt. Like, if we just attach a note that says if that other group builds a sidewalk next to it, they have to then triggers it and it builds a sidewalk, but that's not necessarily what we're looking for, right? We're looking for more of a wider asphalt. So I wouldn't want us to get tripped up like we suddenly require you to build a sidewalk because that's what we put a note in, and then the group next to you builds a sidewalk and suddenly you've got to extend it. But in reality, what we, I think, as a community wants is a wider asphalt trail. So I'm okay with the idea of what we're doing. I just don't know specifically the best way to
Yeah, I believe we can
make sure it
address that
happens.
with the note. The note can be pretty specific, and it can say that Zach would agree within, say, 6 months' notice to build a portion of the multi-use path/sidewalk consistent with what has been constructed by subsequent physical therapy and whatever might be developed on the adjoining property, and/or if the money comes through for the bike path, that portion would essentially be funded by Zach along the property frontage, while the bike path is funded separately. I think we can cover all of that, because listen, it's not in our best interest to, for no reason, put a 4-foot wide
Oh, yeah,
sidewalk
definitely not.
in when you want an 8-foot wide blacktop path.
Mhm.
I mean, that would be silly. So, in pragmatic terms, I think we can satisfy that.
I think it's a great question, Nick, and I like the response there. You can make a reference to what Blue Mountain Group did. You can also make a reference to the master plan that was developed for the easements. So yeah, but through some references, you can kind of nail down exactly what we're looking for. But that's a good point.
Our solicitor isn't here today, so John, you might have to help us craft the language in particular. If we're adding language related to 21.201 on sidewalks, what that would sound like.
Well, you could make a motion that it would be, that the note or plan changes will be made to the satisfaction of the borough engineer. That's a pretty easy way to go about it, but it does, I get a little heartburn when we're approving plans that we don't necessarily see. So that's why I recommended the tabling action, because then the applicant could come back with, this is what we're going to do, this is what it says, and you have a cleaner vote. But, so yes, to get back to the point, so it would be that sidewalks and trails will be, would be constructed and noted on the plans to the satisfaction of the borough engineer.
So if we choose to go that route, that is one way to do it. Is there other discussion, though, about should we do this or take the opportunity to table for one more month?
Is the applicant okay if we table this until next month?
Honestly, we would prefer not to. But whatever you guys want. I mean, if that's where the rubber meets the road, I think we can live with it, but I don't see the strong benefit in actually doing that, simply
Yeah.
because we have such a small project and we're agreeable to the things that you would like us to do here. I firmly believe that between John and Chad and
Yeah.
us, we can certainly work this out at a staff level,
Yeah.
applicant level after the meeting.
So of the 15 comments, this one just went immediately to the priority. And then there was the street light one. Can we talk more about that one before we decide what we're doing here? So before, any thoughts about the sidewalk item, 21.201? So if we move to conditional, that's the language it would be. Okay, so how about street lighting?
So the streetlights do exist on that corner lot, correct? Or they're being put in,
Yes,
and they're not required here currently.
correct.
And you're willing to put them in if you also build the trail in the future?
Yes.
Okay.
Seems like a no-brainer.
And I would support including the streetlights as a conditional approval with working out between you all and the engineer. and happening at that time when the trail is built.
Okay.
I would agree with that.
So how would you, that doesn't, what does that refer to here, Chad? You don't list an item related to the ordinance under 15.
Right.
A-
The only way, you would have to do a motion to conditionally approve the plan, conditioned on the comments from my June 12th letter, specifically the sidewalk would be an 8-foot wide asphalt trail and would include decorative streetlights similar to adjacent property, is what Josh mentioned there, that you can just make a reference to that adjacent property. And then you have the exact reference to the 8-foot trail and the lights.
At the time when the adjacent property chooses to,
Within, I know you were saying
You said 6
months, but I would give them a little bit more than that. I usually say
1 year.
no less than a year, but 2 years isn't too much, because until you go through the process of getting into design, you get the lights on, sometimes it takes at least a year to get that process happening. Because everything's gonna have to get dedicated to the borough, you know what I mean? It's a time-consuming process. So no less than a year, I would say.
Of what? What would the language be? No less than 1 or 2 years of?
Noticed by the borough.
Okay.
We envision it, if this property is developed adjacent to us at some point, then that's probably the mechanism which launches us down that timeline of a year.
And/or the SCAP. Yes, yeah, right. So it's the same thing, two sides. Yeah.
Are you making notes of what this motion would be like?
Yes, we have recordings of this.
Okay.
We'll
So what I can learn here is that there might be some momentum to conditionally approve this based on their recognizing through notes an 8-foot asphalt trail that includes decorative streetlights similar to adjacent properties to be completed within 2 years of notice by the borough. No more than 2 years notice by the borough. Does that sound if I captured that?
That's great.
I know, good. And I did that without our solicitor here. Any thoughts about that? Or does anyone want to move that to a motion? But why don't we, before we do that, any final comments or questions about it and input by John and Chad?
It's all feasible, and nothing would really preclude the developer from doing that. Yeah, we'd be able to work to make sure language is included as a note. That's pretty simple stuff.
And I would just add, from the planning commission perspective, I know, Chad, I was on the same page with you about we were trying to get away from conditional approvals, but I think specifically in this instance with the scope of the project being so small, that's why I personally would be comfortable approving this one conditionally with a number of conditions, and also considering that the two major conditions I feel like are being dealt with the best interests of the borough.
Okay, well said. Any disagreement?
Do I have to say the whole motion?
I think you could say
I think you can paraphrase.
maybe reference that and then what Charles said.
Can you make? the
Okay,
motion?
so,
You have it.
so I'm asking for a motion to conditionally approve Spectra Kote 301 East Water Street based upon conditions related to an 8-foot asphalt trail that includes decorative streetlights similar to adjacent properties to be installed no more than 2 years after notice by the Borough of Gettysburg.
And meeting with the borough engineers.
And based upon the borough engineer recommendation in the June 12th, 2024 letter. So that's the motion I'm asking for. I didn't make it, so somebody make it. Just say,
I would move to
Okay.
make the motion that.
thank you, Nick.
Charles Strauss just
Moved by Nick
I'll second.
and seconded by John. Any last discussion or questions by you? Sound okay?
Sounds great.
Okay. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? And that motion passes 5-0. Thank you very much. Yeah, take care. Yeah, thanks for coming in today. Okay, while we transition to new business, I wanted to make just a few comments related to rezoning under new business. And I shared these at the last meeting, but I think it's worth sharing again, and I'll be brief as the presenters would like to maybe get organized. So after 12 months of work by the borough staff and residents and a consulting firm called Michael Baker International, the Borough Planning Commission received a draft of a new zoning ordinance in May of 2024. And the last zoning process predates me living here and maybe predates some others, not John Rice and not many of those in the room, but there has been not that many opportunities for the Borough of Gettysburg to take a look at our zoning. So this is a really important thing, is what I wanted to first start by saying. It doesn't happen that often. So thank you for being here. At the June 17th meeting, we reviewed the proposed map, and we will continue to revisit that map as we move through the coming months of review. But at this meeting, July 15th, we focus on parts 1 and 5 only. Now, of course, items in these parts, particularly the definitions in part 5, are best understood in the context of the districts in which they relate. So it's okay if, as we're talking about this, you want to ask questions to some degree related to how does this definition actually exist in a real place in the borough. However, we have a whole meeting later on this summer and fall for that matter. So I hope you won't be upset if there's times where we might try to just move things forward, because we're really just talking about the language of the definitions today and not getting too deeply into where those, where the definitions really hit districts. However, we can't help ourselves. We're going to be doing that to some degree as well. So as best as everyone can do, please focus your comments on the provisions of Part 1 on general zoning and the language of the definitions in Part 2. Now, 2 additional notes. Maybe this is just for my colleagues up here. Could we remember the following sources as we as individual members of the Planning Commission read and interpret and perhaps seek to revise the ordinance draft that we have in front of us? And I just brainstormed on these today, but I've been thinking about what sources would this commission look at before we make our recommendation, which we are obliged to do. It's our job now to make a recommendation of the Borough Council, who will ultimately vote on this. So what would we look at to make sense of that? And I came up with 6, but everyone else should add. The first is the existing zoning ordinance. So how are things now? That seems to be something we should look at. The zoning text and map amendments that have been passed in recent years. And I added up the number of years that those of us up here have been on Planning Commission, and it's a total of 40 years. If you add all of the years that we've been up here, it's been 40 years of experience being receptive to residents who want to change the map or the ordinance. So that's something. What changes have been made since the last time rezoning occurred? The regional comprehensive plan, this multi-year effort that the borough and county went through with Strabane Township and Cumberland Township to create a concept of regional planning. Community input. In a minute, we're going to hear some organized community input from a group of residents who did research and want to present the research in kind of an organized fashion. So that would be input of information. Our own individual research. And then finally, the research and arguments provided by the drafting committee that gave us this proposal, working with Michael Baker and our own borough professional staff, mostly John Whitmore, who is our very able zoning officer. So those I just share up here as the considerations that we should make and where we should get our evidence. The next thing I want to say is that some of the back and forth could probably be very easily resolved. If somebody has a question, we have people here who can answer it. But there might be other topics that aren't going to be resolved in one question that we'll have to table, or not table officially, but we'll have to say there have to be more research, there has to be more thought on how to answer that. Or maybe you propose something that is very much a debate, that it's contested. So I wanted to share that some things might be very simple and we'll move through them quickly, and other things we might say, we have to just stop on that topic for this meeting. We have multiple meetings for the rest of the summer and fall where we could revisit it. And then the last thing is logistics. So when you look at Part 1 and Part 5, you'll notice that Part 1 has numbers 27-101 to 27-120. So that's about 20 specific items under Part 1, rules of, what is Part 1 called? What's Part 1 called? I didn't write it down.
Part 1 is the
General zoning provisions. So there are about 20 things under general zoning provisions. I think it would be kind of haphazard for all of us to just, oh, this is what I think about item 17. This is what I think about item 5. So I thought when we get to this discussion and for the planning commission to make comments, that we'd say, okay, we're going to deal with 27-101 to 27-105. Does anybody have any corrections or alternative language? And then we'll see how it goes. And then we'll move to 27-106 to 27-110. And we'll do that 4 times. And some of them might move very quickly, and some of them might take a little longer. So that's my proposal here for how to deal with Part 1. That in this meeting at least, we go through 4 groupings of 5 items and see if any planning commission members, based on input, and please do, if you wish to suggest input in real time, do so. And then when we get to Part 5, the first item under Part 5 is called Rules of Interpretation. It's a very short section that outlines how we understand the concept of definitions. And then the definitions are alphabetical. And I thought we'd go A through G, H through L, M through R, and S through Z. And we'll see how it goes. And if it goes too long, then we go to the next meeting with it. But at least we get started. That's my proposal, and I want to first make sure, John, you're comfortable with that.
Yes.
And secondly, are you all comfortable with that?
Yes.
Then enough of me talking, and let's hear from the presentation of Gettysburg residents. Thank you for being here. And if you could introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Shelley Nouse. As you can see up on the screen, we're going to have a presentation here, and thank you, Charles, for kind of going through that. We do have some research as a group of residents here. A lot of that's not included in this. This is just, again, sort of like an overview of what our thoughts are about this process. So I'm just going to get started. I'm here as a spokesperson today for local citizens that want to be engaged in decisions about the future of the Gettysburg Borough. The borough manager, council president, and 6 other selected individuals have worked for over a year with a consultant in meetings closed to the public to develop a proposed plan for rezoning the borough. Now it is the Planning Commission's job to review and revise and take input from the public to revise a draft as needed. Some of the borough staff and council members have described the rezoning provisions as tweaks to our current regulations. The proposal now under consideration includes monumental changes to our community which will impact the future of heritage tourism, the viewshed of the battlefield, and the historic architectural character of one of the most iconic destinations in the United States, the site of the deciding battle of the Civil War and President Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. Revisions to our zoning ordinance are needed. The borough's 192-page proposal needs adequate time for all the stakeholders to understand, to review, to participate, and to determine how it will impact our homes and our community. This process must be accessible. There is speculation about why the dramatic rezoning is proposed. There are modifications that would change the residential character of our neighborhoods and could greatly reduce residential property values and thus our property tax basis. For example, in the low-density residential districts such as Lincoln Avenue, Broadway, Springs Avenue, and Colt Park, the rezoning proposal identifies the purpose as primarily for single-family detached housing. However, the provision links to Article 3, where multifamily conversion is allowed by special exception, and uses permitted by right include community residence, group homes, child care centers, and the keeping of chickens and honeybees. Very concerning is a proposal to create a 9-acre revitalization district in the downtown core, which allows for extended height buildings up to 72 feet upon a developer meeting only one of 5 incentives. Those incentives are integrated parking, 25% green area, construction of a segment of the inner loop, inclusion of affordable rental units, or interestingly, relocation of the transit center. Why is the relocation of the transit center an incentive for the revitalization district when its relocation is already part of the station project planning? This is a moment in history. In this moment, we are the stewards of Gettysburg. We ask the Planning Commission to slow this process, to consider all the critical information from reliable sources before approving any rezoning plan that could fundamentally change Gettysburg forever. Shown on the screen is a rough drawing of what the revitalization district could look like on Carlisle Street between the Carlisle Street apartments and the vape store. Next are 3 photos of a 6-story building with 205 apartments now under construction in downtown Bethlehem. Visual documentation should be made available before Gettysburg officials make drastic changes to the historic borough that so many before us have spent their lifetimes preserving. There are foundational questions that should be answered but do not need to be answered tonight. What is the projected tax benefit of the rezoning versus the long-term cost? This 9-acre district could provide additional tax revenue, but what is the cost? Police, fire, road maintenance costs should be projected. Last summer, and most likely this summer, we will see a request, if not a restriction, placed on our water reserves. We recently had significant building fires that required 50-plus fire and EMS responders to the borough. Are we capable of handling a large structure fire? Will we end up needing a paid fire service? Or will we see more tax increases while still having a budget deficit? Will tourists, the lifeblood of our economy, continue to come to a charming town of Gettysburg if it's overwhelmed by development? Will tax-paying residents and businesses that came to Gettysburg for the charm leave once these changes occur? What is our real housing need? Borough officials have stated we need 600 more living units. Why? What is our current housing breakdown and occupancy? If more units are needed, should they be in the congested center of the borough when so many new developments are planned in open spaces within walking distance of the borough limits? There are 226 units proposed between Marshalls and Giant, 256 units proposed behind Giant, 2 residential proposals for Hunterstown Road, and land is being cleared on Biglerville Road, to name a few. All of these will be connected to the borough with public transit. What is the traffic impact? No consideration has been expressed in the rezoning proposal about the traffic impact. According to PennDOT, 40,500 vehicles per day travel through Lincoln Square. The station project is estimated to create over 1,700 additional trips per day. How many projected trips per day would be added by a 9-acre revitalization district? At what point will the state of Pennsylvania decide that the traffic signals are needed to be removed or needed in Lincoln Square, requiring the removal of the circle with the beauty it adds to the heart of Gettysburg? Will traffic maneuver on side streets and alleys? What safety concerns will arise with traffic patterns in a town that wants to be more pedestrian and bike friendly? We should have projected traffic impact numbers. The Central Adams Joint Comprehensive Plan warns that without addressing the limitation of the hub and spoke network of roads traveling through Lincoln Square, further development will negatively impact the quality of life and experience in Gettysburg. For 161 years, Gettysburg Borough Councils have wrestled successfully with the financial challenges presented by the tax-exempt properties in the borough and the fact that the boundaries of the borough are permanently established. Rezoning in any community should not be undertaken to fix budget deficits. It is the responsibility of boroughs, managers, planners, and councils to explore revenue initiatives. It is our responsibility as citizens to hold our borough staff and council members accountable to facilitate partnership opportunities and alternatives. There are recent efforts in communities like ours in Pennsylvania seeking partnerships with tax-exempt property owners to create commitments to cost share the infrastructure burden of these properties. These common sense solutions are far more effective than drastically changing zoning to hope and speculate that 7-story buildings will give us the revenue to balance the budget. We are the stewards of Gettysburg at this time in history. We must be dedicated to the task before us. In the words of President Lincoln, to honor the dead that gave the last full measure of devotion. We must treasure and protect this important place in our country's history and ensure that it will be preserved to educate and to inspire for generations to come. Thank you.
So thank you, Ms. Naus, for presenting that. And what I see those 4 items central to be, what I wrote down, and perhaps just to maybe ask John Whitmore if for the next meeting we might learn whether there can be any answers to these or how you would respond to them, because they don't all match up with what's on our agenda today. But they might be things that we'll circle back. So those seem to be proposed tax benefit, housing need, traffic impact, innovative revenue sources. And I think that has now shared it with you. Where I sit on the Planning Commission, it seems like any more information on any of those would be helpful for our recommendation. Not that we are obliged to respond specifically to this one resident. However, the resident has raised it, and I think it's worthy of us exploring as we continue in the process. So what do you think about that as an approach? So learning more or gathering answers for next time?
That should be something we can work to provide at the July meeting, or the July 29th meeting.
Or the July 29th, yeah.
Like as a handout, but, whoa. Okay. When it comes to, so that's something staff can work to, especially as it relates to tax implications of certain land uses, the additional vehicle traffic, the daily vehicle loads that would be occurring with different development types, especially as it relates to higher density. We can provide that information to the community, get it for the Planning Commission to review. So
And
that's not a problem.
thank you, John. Is the consultant still available to answer questions and offer research?
Yes, we would most likely, a lot of that information is going to be coming more from just the state.
Okay.
We're working with not only PennDOT, but then the state chapter of the APA. We can probably get a lot of relevant information on other Pennsylvania communities that have gone through a development that is planned, that we have envisioned in this rezoning. It's always going to be, it's planning, it's not engineering, so it's not going to be exact, but it'll give you a very good idea of, especially when it comes to the dollars and cents, the cost of community services.
And I think that the Planning Commission would agree that if any other resident wishes to present in a similar fashion before we discuss this next time, please just be in contact with John Whitmore, and he will, in conversation with us, add you to the agenda. This is more or less, I don't think we've done this before, but we did it now because we really wanted to draw out community input early. And thank you to Ms. Naus for raising these 4 questions. I think, is there a second part to your presentation more specific to today's business?
John, is this going to work?
Should.
I don't know if I did something like to turn it off.
Okay.
Okay, great. I'm talking specifically about sections 1 and section 5. And by the way, these microphones, there's 2 Borough Council people here. Thank you very much. You can actually hear in the audience, so that's great. I'm Sue Sipperly. I live at 314 North Stratton Street in Gettysburg. And Section 1 is generally procedural items. It's just sort of zoning procedures and things. And I took a look through them, and the one that I really picked up on was section Statement of Community Development Objectives. I think it needs some work. For instance, A is to have a better quality of life. Implies that our quality of life needs improving. I suggest that instead you say preserve and protect the quality of life. B was okay. C says to protect natural and historic resources from exploitation and desecration. It has been determined that. I think you could just eliminate that line and just say our most important resources. You guys with copies, can see what I'm talking about. And then D was missing, and I think you could just insert something that says, create opportunities for centrally located activity centers that would be available to both visitors and residents and potentially encourage interaction. This could mean fitness centers, martial arts, creative arts, and other activities attractive across generations, located where driving is not required. You could also include museums, libraries, or cultural attractions, or even something like a business incubator, where startup businesses share facilities. E was okay. F, I would say, instead of saying improve commercial areas, I'd say maintain them. And then in that same paragraph, it says activation of the rear of buildings in the downtown area. I don't know what that exactly means. Alleys are primarily service corridors, and there could be user conflicts and customer safety issues. That's something you might want to find out more about. G says entrances should be made more attractive. What does that mean? Entrances to what? And then it refers to unsightly objects like TV antennas and traffic signs should be eliminated. I would add to the extent possible. And I'm not sure how much of this is the purview of zoning. And I think H, you could combine H with I to promote commercial and residential development across a broad spectrum of community needs while respecting the borough's historic character. And then I would add 2 additional ones. Provide for meaningful and well-paying employment opportunities within the borough by including adequate land area, districts, and uses within those districts. Protect and maintain, and another one, protect and maintain resources and amenities that benefit the residents of and the visitors to our historic town. These could include public restroom facilities, parking, and public spaces within the downtown and green spaces throughout the borough. I also recommend leaving out any reference to market trends in those objectives. So the next section that is on the agenda tonight is definitions. And I know you can't read this, but this chart is in the rezoning on page 61. There's like 5 pages of charts like this that show uses down the side and zones across the top, and you go through and figure out what zone you're in, whether that use is allowed in your zone. And it's kind of a neat way to do things. But I figured I would take those 5 pages of uses and see whether they were all defined in the definitions. So I did that, And all the ones with asterisks in front of them aren't in the actual definitions at the back of the document in section 5. So I found that less than helpful. So I looked back, and there's actually in a section on page 65 called Principal Uses. It sort of describes these uses. It's not alphabetical. It's divided into 8 categories, and you have to find which one the definition you're looking for would be in. And I also found many of the principal use definitions are extremely detailed, excessively so in my opinion. We don't need a micro-detailed managing document. We need a concise, clear zoning ordinance. I also said short-term lodging is listed in Part 5, but not in the other descriptions. Public open space is also listed in Part 5, but there's no mention of it in the chart. And use, accessory needs to be added. By the way, chickens and beekeeping are listed as uses in the chart, and each have at least 2 pages of requirements in section 27305, but they would violate Chapter 2 of the Borough Code, which prohibits poultry and beekeeping. I found the organization of the draft was not user-friendly at all, having to hunt around in different sections and figure out which category your query fits into becomes arduous. From what Mr. Whitmore has said, the electronic version of the code does not incorporate charts or graphics, so that would be even less usable. So I think this needs to be addressed. During the 2008 major revision of the zoning ordinance, it wasn't a comprehensive rezoning. It was just a lot of revision of the zoning ordinance. The concept of build-to lines was installed. It was a trendy concept at the time, and it could be useful if you were starting with an open field and wanted to build something that evoked a New England village, like the Kentlands or Lakelands in Gettysburg. In a mostly built environment, it doesn't necessarily fit, especially when the borough contains several periods of time and development patterns. In the 2008 version, this is kind of what planners think about, and I'm trying to explain it as painlessly as possible. But in the 2008 version, the build-to line meant you couldn't build any further away from the street than the build-to line, or you had to line up with existing structures on the street. In the 2024 rezoning draft, build-to is still used, but it means you can't build any closer to the street than that line. Same as a setback line. In fact, the ordinance says in paragraph D, the build-to line shall be considered a building setback line. So why have 2 things that are sort of doing the same thing? There's some practical difficulty in each version, as shown on the diagram on the next page. Essentially, the existing space between a house and the street was no longer a front yard, leading to some unforeseen situations. For instance, on this diagram, on the left-hand side, that's your front lot line, and then that red arrow points to the build-to line, and your front yard was in between those build-to line and your front lot line or the curb. So your house is sitting back on the lot, and it's not considered, that green part is not the front yard, just the line between the build-to line and the street. So this can cause some interesting situations. For when you want to build a fence, and everybody assumes that in practice, you can't build a fence taller than 4 feet tall in your front yard. Well, the way it's defined currently, your front yard is between the build-to line and the street. So you can have a 6-foot-tall fence everywhere around, you know, in your front yard, between your house and the build-to line. It gets, you know, it's one of those things where people don't think of the potential situations that could come up. And I have had one of my neighbors built a fence in the last 2 or 3 years and was told that he could have a 6-foot tall fence all the way to the sidewalk, which is about where the build-to line was. And he didn't do that, but he could also have built one across the front because that wasn't his front yard. So it's something that's been nagging at me since 2008 because it was something that was just, in planning, there's some things that just get put in because it's kind of a trendy thing, but they don't always think of what the actual effects can be. So, please.
Would you be able to conclude so we can dig into
Nope,
this now?
this is the last
Oh, this is the last
slide.
one, okay.
But this is why the details are important. And I would say, in your definitions, wherever they end up, a yard nearest the street extending the full width of the lot between the setback line and the front lot line. Where it's a corner lot, there's a front yard on both streets. Where there's an existing structure, the front yard is the area between the principal structure and the street or property line. Delete build-to from the ordinance, please.
Okay.
It's in there in several places, so thanks. And
All right,
thanks
thank
again.
you.
Thanks again for the amplification. This is great.
Okay, so that was our opportunity to hear directly from some residents who organized their thoughts in advance and presented them to us this way. And we'll probably run out of time, so later on. So John, you just want to remind us, there is a meeting on July 29th
Yes.
in this room from 6 to 8 p.m. to continue this type of conversation. And maybe even at that meeting, you might have some thoughts to directly respond to some of these comments. We'll probably deal with Build 2 in a minute.
Well, and the meeting on the 29th, that will be an open house, so it will be an opportunity for direct one-on-one conversation with staff. In terms of specific comments that can come up before then, by all means, bring them to my attention. We can have the dialogue and then bring them to Planning Commission's attention. I will note, it is a little wonky having definitions interspersed in the document and having a separate section. So that would be something that is, as a text change. I mean, we can reorganize the existing materials in a manner that's more, I guess, it allows for it to be more fluent. Overall, though, the goal with the zoning uses was to provide for use classes. I just want to bring that point out, is that's the goal would be, yeah, they appear to be haphazardly thrown into Section 3, but it is residential uses and your commercial uses, the idea, the groupings. If Planning Commission doesn't like that, that's not
Well, let's
hard
wait
to
on that
change.
one. Yeah,
We'll get to that in the
Okay.
next meeting, but just wanted to make that comment.
So now let's turn to Planning Commission comment on Part 1, General Zoning Provisions. You all received this last month, or actually the month before. You've heard these comments. Any corrections, revisions, or questions related to 27-101 to 27-105? And it's okay to say no, because some of them are really straightforward.
Well, I was interested to hear Sue's comments about the purpose. Is that 105? That's 106, sorry.
106,
I'm
yeah.
jumping ahead of myself,
Yeah.
okay. And then
Just
also-
101 to 105.
I do have one more question then that's unrelated, but so comments that are submitted online, how are those collected and how will the Planning Commission receive those?
So what I'm doing right now is that all the comments I've received, I have a printout of them. I'm going to compile those in a document to then provide at the meeting on the, actually, I'll provide that, hopefully we'll be able to have that ready for the meeting on Saturday at the farmer's market, just as a handout, just like, these are the comments that have already come up, like a fact sheet. So we're gonna summarize those for you, but then also provide you with the hard copies. But
So as they come in, basically, is what you're saying?
yes,
Okay.
we've been getting a bit of comment, and it's been picking up. Some of the comments are not really recorded; they're more individual parcels. Those instances, I'll relay that information to you, but I don't have anything to really provide because it's generally just a question about what does the map say, what does the ordinance say, just general information.
Thanks. And no comments about
Okay, so 101 to 105 doesn't seem to be that controversial. Should we move to 106 to 110? And Sue did bring up 106 related to statement of community development objectives. So what was your?
Oh, I was just interested in her comments about that, and I actually don't remember how that section was developed, John, if you have any.
Yes.
Thanks.
So 106, it's in our current ordinance.
Okay.
The D that's missing, what happened is C was consolidated to actually incorporate two separate points. But that was from, my understanding was in the 2008 ordinance established those specific statements of community development objectives. We can modify those. There is no, I mean, it's not required per se, but it is good to have it linking to the comprehensive plan, as this is the document that establishes the basis for land use, thus meeting the future land use portion of the plan.
Other comments? I'll just add one. It seemed like the spirit of Ms. Sipperly's comments related to, like, the borough currently does have a good use of land and we want to maintain it as opposed to improve. Is that a dramatic change to acknowledge that?
I didn't find any problem with
Okay.
the comments that are provided. I mean, if the planning commission is okay, staff can actually incorporate those into revised statement of community development objectives, as there is like one text issue right now.
Yeah, I think this falls in the area, since we just received these, I simply shared them with us and I forwarded them this afternoon. I'm not sure everyone has read all of these enough, but are there any comments related to some of the things that just came up related to 27-106?
I would particularly, I know, so you mentioned kind of combining H and I. Personally, I feel H, which is to encourage development of affordable / sustainable housing for age-qualified persons, and market rate housing to meet housing demand is very important. I was on the rezoning committee that worked on this for a year, and I mean, that was a theme in my efforts with this plan, was to increase housing stock. And I would be interested as well. I mean, like you had mentioned, Shelley, in your presentation about kind of where did that 600 unit number come from? That is an interesting question. I do know, having a lot of friends currently looking for housing in this town, I can tell you that's needed generally. So I would be in favor of keeping that as a in its own kind of line. But obviously, I think we can split hairs here, and generally, I think a lot of the comments you said I would agree with.
It's probably not a valuable use of our time to wordsmith up here,
No.
but to sort of present these to you and see what those recommendations are, and we might revisit them with more strong language with you.
And so what I can do with this information is we can make a few versions of section 27-106.
Okay.
And if modifications are needed, we'll get to that point at a future meeting.
Okay, thank you. Anything else related to 106 to 110? Okay, what about 27-111 to 27-115? These are all very straightforward.
Yeah, so just for the audience, 27-111 is zoning permits. This is the process by which you can modify property or make land development in the borough. Pretty straightforward based on not only local convention but MPC code. The 112 is building permits and certificate of occupancy. Once again, very straightforward. What is a building permit? What is a certificate of occupancy? Zoning certification letter, that's 113. Those are unique little things that zoning officers are generally requested to do to establish property for either transfer, sales, or for valuation purposes, especially when we are talking commercial and industrial properties. We'll get calls frequently on a almost yearly basis for some of these properties that are, if they're refinancing frequently, they need to have a zoning certification letter for their note. So we make it happen. That just provides the groundwork. Fees, I mean, those are this just establishes the Borough Council can set fees, and violations and penalties. Once again, this is pretty standard from our current ordinance, allowing for a $500 fine when there's up to $100 to $500 fines for issues involving zoning enforcement.
Okay. Again, straightforward, but do any planning commission members have alternative language for 27-111 to 115? Okay, then the last set is 27-116 to 27-120.
And these provisions deal primarily with the zoning hearing board, special exceptions, and this general enforcement of the ordinance. There's also a provision for allowing for amendments to the ordinance.
I just noticed under section 1, Sue got me thinking about this because I hadn't been looking at that before, but under 117 on under section F jurisdiction, it's also missing a number 7. Was this, do you know if this section was mostly copied from our previous ordinance, and if there's a reason that number 7 would have been eliminated?
It appears that's another consolidation into one point, but this is coming from MPC and our current ordinance.
Okay.
So that's page 15 you're talking about?
Yes.
So unless someone objects, what I'm hearing from the Planning Commission is that could you, John, based upon some comment we just received from a resident, take another look at 27-106 with the alternative language listed here? And that's the only item that we have under Part 1. Okay, awesome. Any? Yes, Shelley?
I didn't bring this up in the presentation, but under 27, the zoning hearing board, 27-117, section 1, what's E1 on notice. It's only giving 7 days notice for property owners for proposed hearings, and I know in the past this has happened, and then you could be on vacation, get notice in the mail of 7 days and the hearing's already passed. Like everything else in the language, it might be a state rule, but every other thing is 30 days, 45 days, but when it comes to notifying adjacent property owners, it's 7 days for proposed hearings.
John?
Staff would not recommend that the language be changed to, while 30 days, 45 days does provide additional notice to the adjoining property owner, at the same time that creates a conflict with the municipality's planning code and potential for the borough to then be in litigation. Because what the effect will be, you're going to, a project will have to wait 2 additional months for review, and that could cause, if a project has specific time frames and there's justification, this could be something that would go to court.
So are you, I feel like we're talking specifically just about the 7-day notice to adjacent property owners. And I don't know about, I mean, it sounds like 45, 60, potentially introduce some issues, but with like 2 weeks? I mean, is there any, I appreciate what you're saying, Shelley, and I mean, I do think it'd be nice if someone was doing something next to me, and when there was a zoning hearing board, it'd be nice to have a couple weeks' notice to try to make it if I cared.
Staff can look into that and provide the planning commission.
Yeah, and maybe another, like, this is what.
So reach out to Adam to get his take
Yeah.
on it, because him and Mr. Teeter with the zoning hearing board will have
Okay.
specific requirements that they have to follow.
Okay, so we'll highlight that. Any additional items on Part 1? Okay, let's do part 5 and start with 27-501, which is just rules of interpretation. Does anyone have any comment related to that section? Are you able to pull that up, John, or is it too hard to?
What page does it start on
I'm
again?
going to go.
Page 170 of the document, 172 of the PDF.
Thanks.
Is this currently in the, is this in the existing ordinance as listed?
It should be.
Yeah, okay.
The ordinance draft that we're reviewing today is the most recent draft established in May 15th.
No, I meant the existing zoning ordinance, this rules of interpretation.
I'd have to check on that. I believe that's just standard language, but yeah, I don't have anything specific to add.
Okay, then then I thought we could go in alphabetical, but I think the big item here for us to make known is that it seems like the uses appear right in the part 2 or 3, but there's a request, should they also be in the definitions? And how would you respond to that?
I can see justification for having a robust definition section. The goal with what we were trying to do was we were trying to put the specific land uses in its own section. So if it makes it more legible for the public, if it makes it more feasible for the Planning Commission and Zoning Hearing Board to be able to read the ordinance, by all means, we could make that change. It really is just moving words around in the document as opposed to creating new text. Many of the documents, and I'm going to throw Troy since he's not not here, and I'll throw him under the bus. The consultant with Michael Baker, this is one of the first things I mentioned, was we probably need to have a definition section right up front. But staff can provide some, I guess, some design changes to the document to show what that would look like. I don't think it would be a huge change per se. It's still going to be a longer document, but it would have everything then in one spot.
Anyone else want to weigh in on this topic of where the definitions go and how much should be included in them? Chad, what do you think?
Put me on a spot.
Yeah, I'm going to.
It's really 6 in one, half a dozen in the other. The definitions go in the front, they go into the back. Do you define the uses with the uses, or do you put them in a definition? I don't know that there's a right or wrong answer, and I don't know that I really have a preferred method.
Okay.
I would, no, sorry.
One thing that occurred to me, if it's not going to be in the definitions, you could insert that word there with a note as to where it is, like what page or what section you might.
Okay, yeah, we'll consider that then. So beyond formatting now, why don't we talk about specific definitions and whether there are any language changes? We've received this request related to built to lines, so that should be part of this.
So we're starting with the first section?
Yeah, why don't we just start A through G?
Actually, sorry, before,
Or do you want to go back to
there was
rules of
one-
interpretation?
Yeah, I did. There
Go
was
ahead.
one thing I just
Yeah.
wanted to ask about, and it's really just capitalization. I guess when I got to number 5 and the word water course is capitalized, and then the word stream, I was wondering if those were defined terms, but it doesn't seem like words that are necessarily capitalized are also defined, and I see the same thing kind of happens in number 3 with person, applicant are capitalized, but developers not. And I just wondered if there was some reasoning behind capitalization, and if should that indicate a defined term, or, because stream is not a defined term, so maybe it shouldn't be capitalized.
A lot of those text errors are a result of legacy changes that we've made throughout the process of creating the document. Like I said, Troy's not here. I don't want to throw him under the bus again because I just did it. But that was something we discussed, was the need for potentially, as opposed to defining terms and having uppercase words that aren't possessive or proper nouns like that. That's something that kind of grates my teeth. I can understand. We can go through this again
Okay.
and make the changes as necessary. Water courses, though, that generally is a specific term as it relates to state and Commonwealth level water features. So we'll go through this again,
Okay.
because we're finding these problems.
Okay, thanks.
So noting the time, I think I would just suggest to us that we look at the high sort of concept questions that we have related to definitional language, and maybe just do this for another 10 minutes or so, and then allow the public who have gathered here, if they have any comments, and then adjourn. That's my suggestion. Okay, so anything on A through G that really caught your eye that would be worth a discussion, not just an email to John, but a discussion among the group of us on language in definitions A through G.
I do think we should have a discussion about the build to line and build setback line that Sue brought up, and then also just to point out that both of those are in there twice, and so is the definition for condominium is for some reason located in the ordinance twice. So just take out the repeated terms, but then I think that discussion about the build to versus building setback, I think maybe Chad would be a good person to lead that discussion about those.
So we'll start with the build to. I can tell you what the intent and why it's in our current ordinance. So to delete it altogether, I would just have to make sure that we're not missing something somewhere else. So the intent right now is that the faces of the buildings are all kind of matching up. You walk down the sidewalk, you have storefronts, and you're seeing them all. If you get rid of the build to altogether and you just have a building setback, then a property owner could build their building back as far as they wanted to away from the back of the sidewalk. So you would have to walk down a long sidewalk or a service walk or something like that to get to the front of a store or something like that. The intent was to line up all of the fronts of the building. So I would just want to make sure if we're getting rid of build to altogether, and I'm not suggesting that all of a sudden there's going to be all this development in Gettysburg. It's a historic town, and we have to go through Harbor and everything else just to demolish an old building to eliminate that current front of the building. So it's probably not going to, in reality, it probably wouldn't affect much. But just keep in mind that's what the intent of the build to is. The other thing you have to keep in mind too is our current streetscape ordinance also marries up with the build to in that we don't allow parking in the front of the buildings. So this come up in a couple of developments we've had over the years where we didn't want the properties built back away from the back of the sidewalk. We wanted the parking in the rear coming off the alley and the storefronts in the front. So if you just get rid of the build to and now the buildings are pushed back further, then where do you put the parking? Do you put the parking back in the front? Maybe in an old town you don't have a requirement for parking. Maybe it's on-street parking or something like that. So maybe again it's a moot point. But that often the build to often went with the requirement to push the parking to the rear of the building. So if you just remove it all together, there are some potential other. I haven't ever heard the argument to just remove it all together until tonight. So I have to make sure that you were thinking through if you're going to remove it all together, you have to feel unintended consequences, so to speak.
Marty.
So yeah, I remember the build to line coming up during the Shippensburg or Blue Mountain Group. It's rather close to the road, I thought, Water Street. The idea behind it was, yes, increase density, so you move it closer and put the parking back. At least that's what was explained to me by Carly Marshall. One of the things that I thought it didn't allow for then, and then actually didn't happen, was the ability to get trees in there, which was rather disappointing for me. So I know on some of our older streets, they are right smack up against our town is very compactly developed. They did not anticipate, 4,500 vehicles going through the square. I don't know how this relates to the current ordinance. I don't know if there were really any changes
John, what did you all think about build to when you went into this?
So the idea of the front setback is that you can't be in that area. Build to line, you gotta be in this area. That's the justification. Now, you can have a setback standard that has a range that allows for a developer to then establish, but if you want to have a harmonious, I gotta use all the planning terms now, having good rhythm in the block, you would want to have a specific point at which you can say, this is where your front facade has to be.
Is it possible that different districts lend themselves to different thinking
Yes.
about build to? So why don't we asterisk this when we get into the districts?
Okay.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think like if you're in the center of town, it would be odd for a building to be pushed back 6 feet from the rest. But if you're in, like I live on Ridge Avenue, which is low density residential right now, and like I don't think if someone was a few feet back, it would mess up and we don't have tourists walking down it, you know.
Okay. Okay. So thank you, Sarah, for raising that one. Anything else, A through G? Okay, how about H through L?
One thing that staff will note, the historic district is identified in this document, but really most of the provisions are going to be on the Historic Architectural Review Board as opposed to having it as a zoning prerogative. Now, I know that may not make sense for the public. What I'm saying is that the real, when it comes to historic resources, historic structures, and historically significant sites that are defined in this ordinance, it establishes them for a land use, but when you think about how they should be preserved, how they should be built in, or how new buildings should be built in the historic district, that's still going to go to the HARB, the Historic Architectural Review portions of our code.
Yes.
I would just suggest that since you'll have lay people, new residents, future potential residents, businesses using this document, going right to zoning, that your two remaining overlay districts be called out in here under definitions and at least referred to the other section of the borough's ordinances where the regulations lie exactly. So if I'm moving to Gettysburg and I hear about this historic district and I go to the zoning chapter 27 under definitions, I've got resort that have like a reference to the HARB section.
Is that a common practice?
Well, we can provide that information, and yeah, that's something that can be done.
The same with I guess the floodplain's the other remaining overlay, which seemed to cause consternation with other folks coming in.
Yeah.
Right. So that's one stop
And that's
shop.
not in here, no, floodplain is not, okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Could I offer one thing? John, I think we should make a note on the lot coverage. It says that it's areas that infiltrate water. It's becoming a thing now with the new technologies in permeable pavements and permeable pavers, that we're changing the definition for lot coverage to, so for instance, I'll give you an example out in a township where you could put in a Walmart, and if it was all permeable pavement, you could essentially pave the entire property with that definition because it's all permeable. It allows the infiltration. So I think we got to rethink the way that we have that defined. I recently worked on that definition with the Stormwater Authority, and we've provided a definition in the rates, rules, and regulations. So take a look at that and make sure it's consistent in the Stormwater Authorities, the zoning ordinance, and the stormwater ordinance.
Thank you, Chad. Others, H through L? How about M? Again, we'll revisit this, so don't think this is the only time you get to speak on the definitions, but what about M through R?
I thought public notice is odd. Like, the rest of this is a definition of what the words are, right? Like, public meeting, a forum held pursuant to public notice is like what our public notice rules are. It's not like defining what public notice is, so I just didn't know if it really belonged here in definition. But I'm also not like that opposed to it, but while we're talking about it.
Just asterisk.
Yeah.
Think about it. I don't have it might help, before we get to the last section, there are a lot more definitions in here than were in our existing ordinance, correct? So is there a Pennsylvania guideline of definitions, or was this more like the developers, like, I keep saying developer, the consultant was more like, these are good things to include as definitions? I mean, how did you arrive at these?
So most of these definitions have come out in the practice. We find the American Planning Association has provided guidance. It's PAS, Planner Advisory Service. I want to say 521, 522 is the Planner's Dictionary, which is a comprehensive United States. These are other similar types of definitions. When you're making a zoning ordinance, this is something that's frustrating. A zoning ordinance is supposed to be a very localized document. So the definitions are going to change from place to place.
Okay.
That's what
All right,
we
I'm
end up
glad-
with a lot of these funny ones.
I'm going backwards now, so we don't need to spend time on this, but like, for example, the definition of family listed under our ordinance
Yeah.
might be different in another town on what makes up a family.
Yes.
Ours is proposed, and I think it's just copied from what we currently have.
Yes.
Which is 4 or fewer persons who are not related by genetics, et cetera. But it could be that another municipality says that that's 2 people or 6 people. Is that open?
So that specific term is kind of loaded.
Yeah, right.
I would we can define a family.
Well, you have, it is defined here.
Yeah, I'm saying, well, we can, but it's also, that's going to be something that's going to always be viewed skeptically. Some of these things, though, when I'm thinking a good one. I turned to page 178. It's got obscene. Like, how do we define
Obscene, right.
obscenity? That's something that's almost impossible by default to define. We make an effort based on the historic conditions of land use in the borough. So some of those ordinances, some of these definitions are being brought back or brought up over time. We haven't reached a point where there's been community want to change the definition of family. I mean, I can imagine a number of scenarios how it could be defined. It is something that is very notoriously difficult to define.
Yeah, Mike, did you?
Well, I live in an R1 district, and the definition of family and this number of 4 unrelated people becomes difficult sometimes. And that's something that I hope the planning commission will take a look at and get some other input from other folks in other places, whether it's Pennsylvania or somewhere else. Because 4 unrelated individuals, if they're between 18 and 22 years old, that proves to be a problem sometimes. Not only where I live, which is on West Broadway, but in other places in town, that's R1. And I know that R2 and some other areas in town, no problem with that. But I think those of us who live in single-family residential areas, this is an issue. And also, when I look at the proposed, while I'm standing up here, the proposed uses, manufactured home, I don't know what that is. Dwelling, single-family, semi-detached duplex, I'd love to see the definition of that one. Dwelling, multifamily, conversion, I'm not sure what these things are. So as we go through this, I think R1 people are going to be very interested in these definitions. And that a community residence group home, what that is and how that's defined and how that fits into R1 is going to be really important. And I think there's an open meeting for that, for R1. I want to say it's in August or something like
It's
that.
all uses, the whole use chart is the August meeting.
Yeah.
And the definitions currently for all those uses are in that section of the ordinance.
Yeah.
So they're there, but maybe people's eyes are not drawn to them because they're not here. I don't know.
Exactly. That's something we've put a note in, we'll have some changes coming forthwith.
Okay.
And the other thing, I don't know where I saw this, but, permitted uses suggesting is like having bees and chickens in an R1 area, which I find kind of crazy. Not the idea, I like bees, I like chickens, but not in a single-family residential area. I don't think the people in Kote Park would particularly like that. And I know that probably comes with setbacks, not built-ins, but setbacks and how far you are away from your neighbor and all that stuff. But, so I
Thanks,
guess
Mike.
what I'm suggesting is future discussions on this at another open.
Yeah, and definitely that idea of all those uses is the August meeting for us, but all the open houses before that can
Of
discuss it
course.
as well. But why I asked this question, I think Mr. Malwick, you just hit it, is like, we are not bound by some sort of set definition that you got from a manual that's protected by law in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Is that what you're saying? We've created these definitions.
So I'll always go back to the fact that we're not the only ones that are going to be interpreting this ordinance.
Okay.
That at some point, it will be a court. And so the definitions, they have to flow. There has to be a legal, rational nexus of how that definition came into being.
Okay, that's helpful. All right. Then our last set, S through Z.
Tour guide seems to specifically talk about horse-drawn carriage guides, but then in part 3, there's tour operator, which kind of talks about tour guide, more general tour guides, so there just seems to be a difference between those two areas. So we might want to add other types of tour guides in our tour guide definition.
And yeah, that was to really reflect that new use type for tour operators.
Mm-hmm.
So
I was interested in the definition for vehicle, because there's a separate definition for motor vehicle, and there's a definition for something that sounds like it's really just trying to address segways. But, yeah, electronic something or other,
Okay.
yeah. But this is, a vehicle is defined as every device which may be transported or drawn upon a street, except yeah, anyways. So it seems very inclusive, and I think, I was just thinking about the kinds of things we have today that are used for transportation, like push scooters and things like that. And when I search for vehicle in the ordinance, it seems to mostly be talking about motor vehicles. So I was just wanted us to think about, when the ordinance mentions the word vehicle, is it talking about a motor vehicle or this very broad definition of things that sounds like it might include bicycles and scooters and things like that?
Okay.
So we do have motor vehicle defined,
Right.
and that is, it's going to be basically everything except for electric personal assistive mobility devices, or bicycles, which I would think that is a vehicle.
Right, so I think bicycle would be included in the definition of vehicle, and
Yeah.
so would a scooter. But, right, a Segway is separately defined, electric vehicles are separately defined, but it seems like some of the things that people use today for skateboards,
Yeah.
is that a vehicle? So I was just saying that, my point is just that the word vehicle is often used in the ordinance, seeming to mean just motor vehicles, but I think when it's applying to motor vehicles, it should say motor vehicle, not this more expansive term.
And okay, so yeah, we can definitely do that and we'll go through there. The real crux when we're talking about the vehicles isn't so much the ones that are working, it's the junked ones. That's the more the larger
That's
fear.
vehicle non-repairable.
Yeah, but or abandoned. We can go through the ordinance and make that a little bit cleaner.
Thanks.
Anything else on this last section of alphabetic terms? Okay, well, I hope the public isn't so bored out of their mind after that, and also the staff is not annoyed with us, but I hope also that you realize that as we move through the other sections, we're going to come back to definitions, because
Yeah.
it's really hard to really understand them unless we're using them. Same with the map. But we're taking our responsibility here seriously to move through it methodically. Okay, then the next item on our agenda is to announce that our next Planning Commission meeting is scheduled for Monday, August 19th, 2024 at 7 p.m. However, as you've heard, we have a open house in this room on July 29th at 6 p.m.
Yes.
July 29th, 6 p.m. on any topic related to the rezoning process. Bring it to that meeting. But then our next business meeting will be discussing specifically, I don't have that in front of me, John. What sections again are we discussing on the 19th? That's section 2, I believe.
I don't think it's just going to be section 2.
Okay, just section 2.
And that's zoning, the district.
The districts, right.
So then the definition, the further land uses and whatnot would be happening in September.
Okay. So in addition to attending those 2 meetings, you can email jwhitmore@gettysburgpa.org. Gov. With your comments, and we'll see you at our next meeting. Are there, yes?
Well, we will also be at the next farmer's market on this Saturday on the 20th. So I'll be there. You can yell at me, you can throw stuff at me, it'll be fun.
And I will not be there, but I hope that other planning commission members might be able to assist John and be there.
Well, yeah, and especially we're still going through the public commenting phase. So this is how we build the ordinance. So by all means, if you have comments, positive, negative, anything, please let us know.
Okay. Are there additional comments from planning commission members?
Can you remind me when the second open house is? Is that's scheduled too?
We had scheduled that one for August 29th. We also have an option if, I managed to double book myself on July 29th, so I'm going to be a giant head on a screen with staff. If it doesn't work correctly, we can always have an additional meeting on August 5th. Basically, Mondays are going to be zoning days for the next couple of months. So if we have if we need to have other meetings, we can schedule them accordingly, with the exception of those council meeting dates. But yeah, so first one is definitely
July 29th.
July 29th, and then second one is tentatively going to be August 29th.
At 6 p.m.
August
The next one is
26th?
going to be on
I was wondering about that too.
29th
Was
of
he mean
July.
26th?
Is it August 26th, John? That's the Monday.
Or did I say, well, I said Mondays, I'm sorry about that. It is sorry. The second meeting is August 29th, that's the 5th Thursday, so there would
Oh,
not be any
okay.
conflict.
It will be the 29th.
And just given particularly the 7 p.m. versus 6 p.m., can you add those to the calendar?
So I'm having a little bit of techno difficulties at the moment.
Okay.
We will get that fixed, and it will be on our community calendar. Additionally, we have some publication that will go out in the paper closer to the date. But and we'll have something on our Facebook page.
There's a meeting August 29th
Yes,
and July 29th.
yes.
No, not August 29th.
Yes, no, he
Oh,
confirmed.
just-
That one is just not a Monday, it's a
That's fine,
Thursday.
okay.
Which I think is great. Different days, I think different people have different
Yeah.
schedules.
And we'll have the online component for the July 29th. That'll be in the announcement once I can get it put onto the website.
And those meetings are for anything related to rezoning that you want to share. You don't have to follow our schedule for those meetings.
Anything and everything. We will have 5 stations set up, 1 station for each section, handouts associated with the comments we've received to date, comments we received tonight, and hopefully some of the additional information that's been requested tonight.
And I'm just going to use Mr. Malwicki as an example. So your comment about honeybees, I don't know how widely that's shared, but you'd go to the table that's related to district uses and
Yeah.
talk to you or whomever's sitting there and make that comment known. That's how the process will work.
Yes.
Okay. At least that's the July approach, and we'll see what kind of approach should be taken in August.
Yes, so this is something we want to make sure that the comments we're receiving are beneficial to the process of establishing the ordinance.
Yeah.
And if we're not receiving meaningful comment, we can tweak the
Okay.
process.
Before we turn it over to public comment, I just want to say thank you, John. Thank you very much for keeping us organized and supplying evidence and answering all of our questions. So now there is
One more question? Sorry.
Yes.
John, I saw on the HARB agenda tomorrow, there's a possible review of the Gettysburg Station site. Is that is officially on the agenda for tomorrow, for HARB? Do you know?
My understanding is that it was on the agenda. I'm not sure if we've received any materials, so it will most likely be postponed. That'll be a discussion at HARB, how they will proceed, given the continued postponements. At some point, staff does require application be acted upon.
Okay, thanks.
Is there a public comment? Please, again, go to that podium since we have cameras and state your name.
Scott English. I live on Pumping Station Road, Adams County. I also have a business at 6668 West High Street, the Gettysburg Academy. The acknowledgements page, it says Judy Butterfield, Vice President, Ward 1. I think Judy is Ward 3. Fine.
That's true.
I don't know why everybody's picking on chickens and bees. I think as a former beekeeper and hen house operator, they're awesome, but they're very expensive. Maybe something, I know you're not resolving anything tonight, but maybe a community garden that could use the compost from the chickens and actually use the honeybees as pollinators within the borough would be awesome. I don't know how you're going to squeeze that into residential neighborhoods, but I wanted to thank you all for your dedication and time to the borough of Gettysburg. Its future, this is not a minor undertaking. This is huge what you're doing, and I want to thank you all and the council and the public. I want to thank you for allowing the televising these meetings. I think it's awesome. It's imperative. Like I've said to some other people, I can get a text message and a voicemail from GMA about water usage, but nobody texts me or calls me about zoning changes to affect my property and the future of my property and the future of Gettysburg. I think that's very important. And the last thing I'd like to ask is that please consider engaging our largest partner in Gettysburg that considers the borough its view shed. I remember 35 years ago when this building was built out on Pumping Station Road, and the Park Service was insanely upset because the view shed from the tower on West Confederate Avenue was now impeded. So I can't imagine what their feelings would be, since we are their, the Park Service, their largest income is from the tourism industry. Why are they, I think that the sooner you get them engaged in this process and let them know and not give them a customary 30 or 45-day review would only help benefit the final document. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, is there a motion to adjourn?
I move to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, so Nick moved and John seconded. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? And that motion passes 5-0. Thank you, everyone, for being here tonight. Our meeting is adjourned at 9:04 p.m.